Hi, Eric.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. Good to see you again. I love doing these podcasts with you. We had talked about doing one on the recent BarbieCon convention that I attended in Austin just a little over a week ago.
Yeah. How did that go? How did it come about? How'd you even find out about it?
Well, I found out about it the way I find out about everything to do with Barbie, which is through Bradley Justice Yarborough. And I had been planning for a few months to go. And it's so interesting that it happened to be in Austin, which is where you are. And you graciously allowed me to use your apartment while I was there. And coincidentally, you were here in Chatham at that time. So that worked out perfectly.
It did work out. So just walk me through. Tell me what it was like. You land here and you start going. What was the official first day of the actual conference and what day did you get there?
Oh gosh, now you're taxing my memory. I think I arrived on Wednesday, and no, I arrived on Tuesday evening. And then on Wednesday, I went over to the Hilton, which is where it was, which is just a couple of blocks away from you. But I did take an Uber because I was afraid it was so hot and
It
humid.
was over 100 degrees. It was
Yeah.
horrific.
I didn't want to get all hot and sweaty before I even arrived. And so I went over to the hotel and I went up to Bradley's room where he had everything set up for me to do a book signing for my book, Dad, Barbie, and Me, an insider biography about my dad, Jack Ryan, invented Barbie and Hot Wheels and Chatty Cathy and a whole bunch of other toys. And so he had already notified everybody that I would be doing signings that day from, I don't know, it was like 11 to 4, something like that. And this is before the official start of the convention, where attendees who are dealers bring dolls and other wares and do what's called room sales. And that's a big thing for a lot of people because not everybody wants to do the main sales room. So this, even if you're like a small vendor, you can do stuff out of your room. So anyway,
So people like set up tables and sell Barbies. Like paint me a picture. What does BarbieCon look like?
well, okay, well, after I did my book signing, which was great, lots of people came and I signed books for them and took pictures and all that. Later, I went downstairs with Bradley and we just sort of walked through the whole convention space, which also included the sales room, which was really remarkable. A huge, huge room with people selling everything Barbie, from vintage Barbies to recent Barbies, Barbie clothes, Barbie accessories. A lot of people make things for Barbies, furniture, clothes, other accessories and things like that. And so it's kind of overwhelming. There are so many things available for Barbie. I wanted to buy a lot of things, but I resisted because I keep telling myself and other people that I'm not a collector. We'll see how long that lasts.
And so paint me a picture even deeper. Like what is the demographics? Like what do the people look like? Age ranges, like yeah, what if I was just attending BarbieCon, what would I expect?
Well, I think there is a wide spectrum of people who are Barbie fans, Barbie collectors. I think it skews a little bit older. I mean, you don't see a lot of people who are, you know, teenagers or young adults. But, the one thing everybody has in common is, they're mad about Barbie. Oh, and I forgot to mention Beth and Ava. For those of you who don't know, Beth is my daughter, Ava is my granddaughter, and they both live in Austin. So they came by at the end of the signing, which was great. We did some wandering around together and we took some pictures. There were places for photo opportunities in on the main floors where all of the seminars and the sales room are, so you could go up against a pink background. I'll try to put some of that up when I post this so you get an idea of what things look like. And let's see. So that was that. I'm trying to think. So that was, it hadn't officially started. So the next day was Thursday, and I came out back to the hotel to Bradley's room, and then we went downstairs to the official Mattel luncheon. And that involved all of the attendees. I think there were something like 900 attendees. So we were in one of the big ballrooms, and there were round tables of 10 set up all over. And there was a presentation of a variety of things, including the unveiling of the new Barbie postage stamps. So that was a big deal that they were first unveiled at this particular convention, and there was a lot of hoop-de-doo about that.
And are people like accosting you? Are they coming up to you? Like what is that like?
Uh,
And I mean, do people know you?
Apparently, I
No
know.
need to be modest. We want to know what happened. Seriously, just
Well,
what happened?
Well, for the last 2 years, I've been going to Bradley's event in North Carolina, also known as BradleyCon. And so I've gotten to know quite a few people. His event has about, I don't know, 125 people that attend. And so I've certainly gotten to know them. I'm also very active on social media, and I've been actively promoting the book. So a lot of people know me from that. So yes, I would say a lot of people, came up and introduced them. People I knew, I saw them, and then there were people I hadn't met before that came up and introduced themselves, and so it was great to meet all these new people.
Yeah, but go deeper. Go deeper. What were people sharing personal stories? Like what happened? Can you think of one that stood out?
Well, I'll tell you, the personal stories generally come when I do signings. It seems for some reason, when I'm signing a book for somebody, and the two of us are just sort of there leaning in, people, first of all, they thank me for bringing to light what my father did and for telling the real story of what happened with Mattel and the development of Barbie. And then lots of times people tell me really personal stories about what Barbie meant to them when they were growing up. How they might have been lonely or misunderstood. And there are a lot of men who are Barbie fans, and a lot of them talked about how Barbie was really a friend to them when they were growing up and maybe feeling as if they didn't fit in with what was more customary at the time. And I'm really touched by that. You know, I mean, my experience with Barbie is my experience with Barbie. And so, I played with her when I grew up. And then after that, I moved on to other things. So reconnecting with how important playing with Barbie was and continues to be for these older collectors has really been eye-opening for me.
Yeah, it is. Like, would you say Barbie was the most important toy when you were growing up to you? Or did you have a slightly different relationship? Because I would just, posit that everybody at BarbieCon, Barbie was the most important toy in their lives. But yeah, how did that fit into your experience with it? Because you had a one of one experience with Barbie.
I did, but I don't think my experience was the same as everyone else's. I mean, first of all, I didn't see how extraordinary she was because, first of all, she had just been introduced when I first got her. and, late 50s, early 60s, and then on. And my parents didn't want to spoil my sister and me, so we weren't given a lot of Barbies. But my mother had a stash of Barbies hidden in her dressing room, along with her stash of candy, which she also had hidden in her dressing room, and a stash of clothes. And the idea was is that she would dole them out to my sister and me when we were good and deserved a little treat. But of course, I figured out where they were, and I did help myself to some because there were so many of them, and I figured, she wasn't going to miss them. So I will confess to that. But an interesting thing about all of this is when I was growing up, we had a lot of pets. We had cats and dogs and birds and rabbits and chickens and ducks and hamsters and guinea pigs and, just about everything else, a pony that you can imagine. And I remember my father saying at one point that he would never be able to design a toy that was as engaging as our pets. And you know what? He was right about that because my sister and I, and my mother too, were all gaga about pets. And my father, not so much. He, I don't know, he didn't really get the pet thing. And I was really crazy about horses. And at some point, I stopped playing with toys and dolls and got very involved with horses. And I really, really wanted a horse. And I asked for a horse, and my parents said no. So I raised money by working around the state and doing some of the things that the young men in our UCLA student program were doing, like washing cars and cleaning and all these other tasks around there. I got $1.10 an hour, and I saved up enough money to buy my first horse. But my dad wasn't a fan of horses. I mean, for me, maybe, but his experiences had always been bad. And he described riding a horse as being on a motorcycle with rubber handles and no brakes. And I think one threw him in a drainage ditch once.
Now, that is very, very interesting, especially the fact that you said that your dad didn't really get pets, but he did understand the infatuation. And that is interesting because your dad would make toys and then they would let kids at Mattel, right, play with the toys, and they would kind of watch how they played with the toys, and they got a ton of feedback from it. Your dad was an expert at watching kids' infatuation with a thing. And of all those hours that he was watching kids play with toys, nothing came close to watching you and your sister playing with the animals. That is very, very interesting.
It is, and you're right about him being a watcher. I mean, he was a great observer of people and their behavior. And when I was growing up, and he was throwing all of these parties, at one point about he was giving about 200 per year, some for as many as 1,000 guests. There was a lot to watch. And his idea was to create a situation on the estate that encouraged people to play and that would surprise and delight them. And that's why, he had converted part of it into a castle and had these Tom Jones dinners. He had a full-size treehouse for adults with a spiral staircase that went up to it with a chandelier and telephones and a fire engine, an antique fire engine that he could take people on rides because these were all adult-sized toys. And he loved to watch people interacting in those environments, the same as having the toy testing at Mattel.
I can just picture the juxtaposition of your dad when he's at Raytheon dealing with the tight asses there. I mean, the people who are under the most pressure, like on earth, during the Cold War, him dealing with that, juxtaposed with making toys for kids and throwing these parties. Like, I guarantee he looked back, or he was talking to your mom and he's like, 5 years ago life was so freaking different. And that is the funniest thing to me, is the life that he led at Raytheon to what was happening at Mattel, and just how much lighter things at Mattel must have been, figuratively and literally, like more sunlight, just things actually just being lighter. And then, of course, like, spoiler alert, but things get dark at Mattel as well. But yeah, that is very interesting. So, what was your favorite toy when you were growing up?
I have to think about that for a minute. I love Barbie because I love that I could play with her. I was already very interested in fashion and clothing and things like that. So she had all of these wonderful outfits that I could dress her in. And the fact that, we could play Barbies and put Barbie in different situations and create different scenarios and all of that. I love that. I didn't really play with Hot Wheels. They came later, and at that point I was sort of on to other things. But you know what? I liked what I liked to do for play was, first of all, I liked to run around the estate because it was on 5 acres and there was a lot there other than what I've already described. There was a pool and a pool house, a tennis and a tennis house, trails leading down the hillside, a waterfall cascading down there. And there were always a lot of people, and they were always doing different things, either making improvements, entertaining. And I liked being engaged with people a lot in the same way that my father did. And I hadn't really thought of that before, but there was always something happening. And I wanted to be a part of all of those happenings. I wanted to be where all the action was. And at one point, I even created a circus. I know. Let me think, I was probably about 12, and I decided I was going to have a circus on our tennis court. So the first thing I thought of that you need for a circus is a horse. And this was before I owned a horse or we had a pony or anything like that. So I had to figure out how to get a horse. And I think that's probably why I wanted to do the circus, because it would be an excuse to get a horse up to the estate. And of course, there was no internet, nothing like that. So what I had to do was I had to look through the yellow pages, the phone book, and try to figure out who had horses that would rent me one. And I'm dialing the phone, I'm calling these other places. And I remember my question to them was, do you rent horses for parties at people's houses? That was the ask. I drilled down on that because I was a kid and I didn't want to sound like an idiot. And I finally found a guy who would bring up a horse. It was a brown and white paint. And we had it all day on the tennis court, basically going around and around. And one of my friends was dressed up as a clown. One was dressed up as a lion tamer. One had a cape on, and I guess she was doing like magic or something like that. And I still have pictures of all of that. But it was the idea of creating a production. And now I realize that that was in many ways simulating what my dad was doing. But of course, I didn't make that connection back then.
You know, Barbie is very aspirational, and I'm far from the Barbie expert here, but I would just remember Ava playing with a doll, and the doll that she had was a baby, and she even had a baby stroller for it. And there's a video of her on her first birthday pushing the stroller, the baby stroller, and the baby in the stroller, pushing it around. And you know, she was trying to be like mommy. That was like the thing. And again, I'm not the doll expert, but a lot of dolls are like their babies. And Barbie was this like It was like a woman. It was something that a kid could play with and grow into. And yeah, I mean, there's anyway, it's just the aspirational thing. I just always thought was very interesting. Um, but yeah,
Right, because you could make Barbie into whatever you wanted her to do or be, um, you know, in your life. Um, but I should make one comment about this, and that is, in the Barbie movie that came out a couple years ago, there's a line in it that talks about, before Barbie, all dolls were baby dolls, and that actually is not the truth. When Barbie came out, there were two um, other fashion dolls that were already on the market where you could buy the doll and buy the clothes and do all of that. So she wasn't the forerunner in that. And actually, having fashion dolls goes way, way, way back. I'm not an expert on this, but there were French fashion dolls. And there were fashion dolls that were used by fashion designers. They would create a miniature version of an outfit that they wanted to sell to their clients and send the doll dressed in this outfit so you could decide if this is what you'd like to have made for yourself. So there is a whole history of fashion dolls. I think what's different is because of the way Barbie was made, there were more things that you could do with her, and hence the term play Barbies. So that is one of the things that distinguished her from previous iterations.
um, and so how many days was BarbieCon in total?
The official BarbieCon started on Thursday with the Mattel luncheon, and then went through Saturday evening, which was the final dinner. And there were lots of seminars and activities. You could go to some of these activities and learn how to make something for Barbie, which was really cool. And then Bradley and I did a seminar or whatever you want to call it on, let's see, what day was that? I think, oh, it was Friday late in the day. And so we had a lot of attendees. In fact, so many that they had to stop letting people in. So that was very gratifying that people wanted to hear us. But Bradley had prepared a slideshow that talked about my father's background, how he came to Mattel, what the early days of Mattel were like, and then talked about how things fell apart eventually. And then we had a question and answer afterwards, and then after that, I sold and signed books. But it was great. It was really great.
And then you threw an after party at my house.
Well, yes. Let me think. I'm trying to think. Oh, I think we did that. We did that on Thursday night. Bradley invited a few people over, including Bill Greening, the former Barbie designer, and a few other close buddies. And so we took over your apartment. And it was funny because we were trying to organize this party at the last minute, literally like 2 hours before. We didn't have any food or drinks or anything. So Bradley and his friend Sean and I took an Uber, and we wanted to go to an HEB grocery store. Only we gave the Uber the address of one that wasn't near where we were. So we went to, I don't know, we were like on a freeway and went a long way away. And then the guy is driving around the neighborhood and he can't find the HEB. And, we're looking at our watches trying to figure out how are we going to get everything back in time. And finally we get in there, and it's like that show Supermarket Shopping Sweep, where you take a cart and you're running up and down every aisle throwing stuff into the cart. But we managed to get everything, and they dropped me off, and I set up some food and drinks and things like that. And then Bradley brought the group over. They walked over from the convention center, and it was still light out. And as you can probably see if you're watching us, you see big buildings here. Eric's up on the 16th floor, and there's a lot of glass and a terrace that looks out over Austin. And then, as the sun went down and the lights came on, it's so magical there. And we had music and food and drink, and we just hung out and had a really lovely time.
That's so fun. What's the next big Barbie event? Not necessarily just for the book, but when do the Barbie people come together again?
Well, the two big events that I know about and have been involved in are BradleyCon that happens in the spring, and then there will be another BarbieCon that's going to be in Phoenix, Arizona next year. So everybody's looking forward to that. And then in the meantime, this November 12th is would be my father's 100th birthday. So we are planning some events to go along with that. We're still in the planning stages. Actually, Bradley and his husband Chris are coming here to Cape Cod in just a few days. And part of that is going to be putting together all of the things that we want to do to mark my dad's 100th anniversary. So we're really excited about that.
So, what are you planning for your dad's 100th?
Well, it's still in the planning stages, and when until we're set on some things, we're probably not going to leak that. There are a couple of museums that we might be doing something with, and then I would like to do some sort of celebration on his actual birthday in Los Angeles. And again, we're just sort of putting that together. And in the meantime, I'm still traveling around doing book signings. In about a week, I'm going to be doing a book signing event and question and answer up in Provincetown, Massachusetts, which is, about an hour away from where I am here. And so that's going to be a lot of fun. Apparently, there are a lot of Barbie fans in Provincetown, so it'll be great. Just what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get the word out. I'm trying to share the story because it's a piece of history. It deserves to be told truthfully. And it's been kind of an uphill battle to do that. But it's remarkable how people are responding to it with sort of like, oh, I didn't know that's what happened. And along the way, I'm having an opportunity to have conversations with people about their own experiences. And people sometimes give me little tidbits of history because they were involved with it at some point. So it's really been a terrific experience.
If your dad were alive on his 100th birthday and he was about to blow out the candles, what do you think his one wish would be?
Well, I think he would express a lot of gratitude for the loyalty that people have to Barbie and their continued interest in Barbie and their continued interest in wanting to keep the whole Barbie story alive. And I think he'd just be really, really happy that all of these decades later, people are still playing with her.
What do you think his wish would be? Because your dad seems like a guy who's going to make a good wish. He's not going to give up a chance to do that.
Well, it depends upon whether you look at it in terms of what happened in his life that didn't turn out so well, and him being kind of excluded from the history. And so if I think that's the way I'd like to approach this question. And I think that what he would wish for is that he be acknowledged for the huge part that he played, not just in creating Barbie, but in the development of Mattel as a whole, the creation of Chatty Cathy, all the talking toys and Hot Wheels and all of that. And, I'm sure he would enjoy having the credit for that, especially since he had the patents for all of these things. But, he'd want people to know what the real story was. So I think it would be really great if at some point that Mattel would acknowledge all of this and invite him back into the fold.
And what would that look like? That would look like somebody C-suite, or this would look like a press release, or be a podcast with some exec there. What would that look like?
Well, I think it would be something very public, you know, maybe some sort of ceremony at Mattel where he was presented with a plaque or something like that, and the press was there and wrote about it, and that he'd be admitted to the Mattel Hall of Fame if there is such a thing. But it's such an important part of history. I think Mattel is missing an opportunity by excluding this. I mean, Barbie had a mother, that was Ruth, but she also had a dad, and that was my father, Jack Ryan. And until that's acknowledged, the story isn't complete.
If you could reach the execs, what would you want to tell them? And I mean, you say that this would help them. How would this help them?
Well, I think anything helps that tells the actual story of what happened. I mean, this happened a long time ago. And when my father left Mattel, it wasn't on good terms. And I mean, it happened when my father left Mattel, it was during a very tumultuous time for Mattel. Ruth and Elliot Handler had been basically ejected from the company because of things that they did that weren't exactly kosher. And so it was a very dark time. And then, years later, after they'd been gone for a while, Ruth Handler started making statements about, what the history was, and she completely excluded my father. And I can understand how, she might have been bitter about how things ended at Mattel, but they didn't end that way because of anything that my father did. So I don't see at this point how it hurts Mattel to acknowledge what actually happened. There's no boogeyman here. There's nobody to blame. We just need to take a look at the situation. I mean, Hot Wheels and Barbie still account for a huge percentage of Mattel's earnings decades later. And this all started with my father. You can't really separate Mattel and my father, because my father, in so many ways beyond just creating these specific toys, changed how Mattel did business, and helped to, build this company that was, the most important toy company in history and created some of the most important toys in the world. So I don't see how it would hurt Mattel to talk about that, and it's something new and fresh for them to talk about.
Yeah, and I guess it's almost the more that the real story comes out, the longer they go from addressing it, actually it does get worse for them, because now it becomes a thing that they're like seemingly avoiding, which just gets stranger and stranger. But yeah, so your ask is even beyond just Barbie and Hot Wheels, but Mattel as a business and changing how they operated, which is something that's like probably less known and less tangible because a lot of that stuff is behind the scenes, but nonetheless turn them into like a business powerhouse.
Yes, and that's exactly right. And in writing this book, I talk a lot about Mattel's malfeasance and all of that and the lawsuit. But, it's not my desire to trash Mattel on any level at all. Because if I trash Mattel as a whole, I'm also trashing everything that my father did. I think that, we're in a new time here. A lot of time has passed since the more unfortunate things happened there. And it's time to get together and celebrate, what was and can continue to be great about Mattel and what an important role my father has played in all of this, even after his death and even after he was written out of the story.
I just have one last question, and you might want to cut this out, but what would your dad have thought about AI?
Wow, I think he would love it. He, my father loved to, like when he was working on the castle or any sort of idea, mock things up. That was, he would build a very crude prototype of something to see if it worked, to see what it looked like. And that was both, in his work at Mattel and what he was doing up at the estate. So the ability to be able to visualize something, where you just type in a few keys, describe something, and boom, you've got an animated version of it. I think he would have absolutely loved that. And I think he really would have pushed it to the farthest extreme that he could come up with in his engineering and design and creative mind.
Yeah, I mean, imagine being able to mock stuff up instantaneously, like in a fraction of a second, or like send party invitations, automated, customized party invitations. Like I could think of a whole bunch. Making music, yeah, and like organizing all his notes. He had so many notes everywhere. But yeah, that is interesting.
Well, thank you, Eric. I appreciate you coming on my podcast, even though you end up being the interviewer whenever we do these things together. But that works just fine for me. And, as Jack's grandson, you have a vested interest in this, and I'm sure it's important to you for everybody to know the real story and to continue his legacy.
Extremely. And I want to tease just a little bit about what some newer content that's going to be coming out. Like you could call it gated content, but it's just going to be more of a deep dive on what this whole process is been like writing the book. And I would say not less about Jack, but more about like your journey on getting this to where it is. I mean, we could go back to 2016, 2017. There are some wild stories that nobody has heard. I know for a fact nobody has heard them. And so, yeah, you'll be launching a Patreon coming soon. And so it'll just be like additional content in addition to the free episodes that are coming out from Spotify. And yeah, super excited that that's where we will be announcing what's happening with the 100-year birthday party and just a whole bunch of other kind of cool stuff that'll be there first. So yeah, just a little bit of a teaser as we close out.
Well, thank you for teasing that. Yes, I think it's going to be a lot of fun. There are a lot of things that people have asked me that I haven't answered before, and there's a lot of stuff that isn't in the book that we will be sharing. And, just like you said, the whole process behind it. I mean, it literally took me 14 years to do it, and it was quite a journey. So, well, thank you, Eric, for being here again. I hope we do this again soon.
We definitely will. Love you.
Love you too, sweetie. Bye.